Okay, let's start. So first of all, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us today in what we believe is a seminar and a forum of crucial importance and urgency. Today's seminar is entitled Witnessing in Context of Oppression, the Ethical and Therapeutic Roles of Mental Health Professionals Facing Colonial Trauma. And is organized by myself, Francesca Esposito, in collaboration with a big group, community of people. Cinzia Albanesi, whose Department of Psychology is not here, Annalisa Cecconi, who's also Department of Psychology, Lorenzo Pezzani, Department of Arts, Tarak Amini, Department of Arts, and Alia Jazim, the Colonial Medicine, as well as with other activists, people engaged in solidarity actions for Palestine, Maite, Maria, Francesca. So it has been a very long journey for welcoming here today a very special and important guest whose present honors and emotions us. I'm very emotional today as well. Dr. Samah Jabr, a consultant psychiatrist practicing in Palestine, serving communities in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and who is the former head of a mental health unit within the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Dr. Jabr is an associate clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. She's also a member of the Scientific Committee of the Global Initiative Against Impunity for International Crimes and Serious Human Rights Violations, a program which is co-funded by the European Union. Dr. Samah Jabr is a trainer and supervisor with a special focus on cognitive behavioral therapy and the Istanbul Protocol for the documentation of torture. She frequently consults on program development for international organizations, and her key interests include the rights of prisoners, suicide prevention, and historical trauma. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Jabr has dedicated over 2 decades of advocating on behalf of the mental health care of the Palestinian people, focusing on victims of torture and trauma. She's the author of several books, including Beyond the Front Lines, Sumud in Times of Genocide, and The Time of Genocide, bearing witness to a year in Palestine, which is her latest. Many of these have been published in multiple languages, and some of them are here. They're available in Bologna in the library, and if you're interested, we also have some copies here, and if you don't have them already, it's a must read. Dr. Jabr integrates her medical expertise with her activism, often addressing the psychological impact of occupation, historical trauma, and war. She's a founding member of the Palestine Global Mental Health Network and the Sumud Mental Health Network. She's a prolific speaker on liberation psychology and the ethical responsibilities of mental health professionals in conflict zones. Dr. Jabr undertook a long and brisk journey to be with us today, and we are deeply honored and grateful for this. Her words and voice carry immense importance in this very historical moment we are currently facing. As we speak, Palestinian people are dying amid what the United Nations Special Committee, Amnesty International, and many other experts and human rights organizations have clearly defined as an unfolding genocide perpetrated by the State of Israel during its ongoing invasion, a bombing of the Gaza Strip as part of the Gaza war. The genocidal act described by these experts and human rights organizations include large-scale killings, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, the destruction of civil infrastructures, attacks on healthcare workers, and forced displacement of civilians. Approximately 55,000 people have reported killed since the Gaza war began in October 2023, according to official figures from the Health Ministry. The majority of these are civilians, including a large number of women and children. Journalists, media workers, humanitarian aid staff, healthcare practitioners have also been brutally killed. We all remember the horrific images of hospitals bombed with patients and doctors still inside. The Israeli state has repeatedly targeted healthcare facilities in Gaza, including the bombing of at least 36 hospitals. It is important to recall that the targeting of healthcare facilities, medical personnel, and patients constitute a war crime under the 1949 Geneva Convention. As part of its genocidal campaign against Palestinians in Gaza, Israel has also systematically pursued the wholesale destruction of a Palestinian education system. The term scholasticide, some of you have certainly heard, first coined by the Palestinian academic Karma Nabulsi during the Israel 2009 war on Gaza, describes the deliberate, systematic, and large-scale destruction of Palestinian educational institutions and infrastructure. Israeli military attacks have consistently targeted schools, universities, libraries. They have killed and injured thousands of teachers, students, and scholars, and displaced hundreds of thousands more. Over a year and a half of relentless military attacks and man-made humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza have created conditions under which sustaining the educational process has become nearly impossible. According to an assessment published by the Global Education Cluster on April 1st, due to this systematic destruction, ongoing bombardments, repeated forced displacement, power and internet outages, and the burdens placed on students to help their families secure food, water, and firewood for cooking, over 720,000 Palestinian students have experienced a complete interruption in their education during the genocide. According to the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, between 7 October 2023 and 15 October 2025, 13,419 students were killed and 21,653 were injured. Among educational staff, 651 teachers have been killed and 2,791 were injured, while the number of students and staff detained remains unknown, and it is estimated to be in the hundreds. These are not just statistics, they're people. They are part of a global education and academic community. They are our students, our colleagues, and each number carries a name, a story, a family in mourning, and we all need to remember and mourn them deeply. These actions are a fundamental part of a broader genocidal strategy aimed at raising the educational and cultural independence of the Palestinian people and obliterating their potential for growth and development. And in line with this, it also goals the destruction of all Palestinian archives and cultural centers. We have witnessed similar patterns throughout history, for example, in the systematic destruction by colonizers of systems of knowledge of indigenous people. And the plan is clear. It's the deliberate destruction of the entire infrastructure of cultural and social reproduction of the Palestinian people, coupled with the forced displacement and physical annihilation. All these processes, unfortunately, are not new, nor they did start on October 7. They began long before, and they have their roots at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. Just a few days ago, we observed the anniversary of the Nakba, which in Arabic means the catastrophe. In 1948, with the proclamation of the State of Israel, more than 700,000 Palestinian people were forced into exile. This happened due to a racist ideology, Zionist ideology, which, like other colonialist movements, is based on the idea of eliminating native populations. And it is important to remember that in 1948, the self-proclaimed State of Israel received immediate recognition from several global north states, Western states, first and foremost the United States, but also other Russia, and others. So Dr. Jabr recounts all this and much more with brilliant clarity and sharp analytical ability in her numerous essays and articles. Drawing from her unique clinical expertise, she offers us a profound understanding of the reality in Palestine, diagnosing the psychopathogenic dynamics of political violence in a society that has, for too many years, lived under military occupation and settler colonialism. In doing so, she carries forward the legacy of important liberation psychologists like Martin Baró, brutally killed in El Salvador, who considered it the psychologist's mission to intervene in the subjective processes that sustain structures of injustice and to make them visible. In fact, as both Martin Baró and Dr. Samah Jabr warn us, is the limitation of Western psychology, which lies in its frequent failure to illuminate the connection between personal alienation and social oppression, as if, to quote Martin Baró again, people's pathology were something alien to history and society, or as if the meaning of behavioral problems could be fully explained at the individual level. For them, instead, mental health is the materialization in a person or group of the humanizing or alienating character of an intertwining of historical relationships. Therefore, theirs is a psychology of liberation, one that allows oppressed people to become protagonists of their own history and to achieve the changes that will free them from oppression. Dr. Jabr analyzes, as she states at the beginning of her most recent book, The Times of Genocide, published by Sensibili alle Folle in 2024, does not focus solely on describing the unimaginable impact of genocide on the mental health of Palestinians, nor it is meant to romanticize Palestinians' mood, a notion that she will probably address. She writes, "I'm here to warn you of the imminent collapse of our shared sense of humanity." She then continues, "Dear friends, colleagues, comrades, as we know it, wounded, aching, fearful, and betrayed, Gaza will one day rise from the rubble and look us in the eyes. Perhaps it will ask us what role we played. Perhaps it will simply forgive us, as it has many times before. The urgency today is to save our dying humanity, which has failed to protect the lives of Gaza inhabitants, to foster compassion, and to reaffirm the values that define us as human beings. Let us save our humanity from the rubbles of Gaza." Saving our dying humanity in the face of the normalization and live streaming of this genocide is an urgent imperative that Dr. Samah Jabr reminds us. And as she teaches us, there is much we can do, beginning with what is close to us. For instance, I don't know how many of you are aware that from about a year and a half ago until last month, 65 people and 18 families have arrived in Bologna from Gaza due to the war and the forced displacement caused by the Israeli military occupation. These people arrive in our cities, uprooted from their land, separated from their loved ones, carrying deep visible and invisible wounds of trauma and violence. Often abandoned by institutions, those who have taken care of these people coming from Gaza and welcomed them in Bologna are a wonderful network of volunteers and solidarity-driven people. Among the newcomers are children with amputations, cancer patients bearing the scars of the war that failed to protect them. Tonight, more people will arrive. Relatives of those who are already here, forced into exile by the ongoing war. All of these individuals have had family reunification applications stalled for a long time without clear reasons. At last tonight, they will finally embrace their loved ones. This network is called Bologna for Gaza, and you can find them on Instagram. I invite all of you to look them up and learn about the beautiful and vitally important work they're doing to welcome Palestinian people and families, offering them expertise and support. I also invite you as psychologists, health professionals, mental health professionals, to participate in this process, to offer your time, your expertise, your dedication, and above all, your solidarity, which is the thing that has the most enormous therapeutic value. Now, without further ado, I want to give the floor to our speakers and guests, Dr. Samah Jabr, whose ongoing battle is to generate Palestinian knowledge and share it with the world, thus contributing to the liberation of their people, to the liberation of the mind, therapy, awareness, and critical consciousness towards the dismantling of an entrenched system of injustice. And I invite everyone to stand up and welcome Dr. Samah Jabr with me. Thank you, Dr. Jabr.
Wow, thank you for a very warm welcome, Dr. Francesca Esposito. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here today to talk to you. Thanks for everyone who contributed to organizing this event, Alia, Tarek, Annalisa, and all your other colleagues. And thank you for coming. You don't need a psychiatrist and a mental health expert to tell you that war and plausible genocide are not good for your mind. Not only for the minds of Palestinians, but for the minds of those who watch from distance a televised genocide. The fact that you choose to come today and not to turn your face away from Palestine means that you are maintaining the fabric of humanity that connects between all of us. Today, I'm supposed to talk about the role of mental health professionals, the ethical commitment, the professional commitment in difficult times like the time we're going through in Palestine. And to put it very briefly, I would say, understanding those who suffer not only from the perspective of the biomedical, but also the social and political, and to extend our role beyond the clinic to be participants in advocacy and to practice a critical human right-based approach to mental health. So that's the key message of this talk. Now let me delve into it slowly. Let me first take you to a quick tour, a quick visit to my clinic. I will share with you a few cases that I observed in Palestine over the past 600 days of genocide. Do you hear me? Or okay. The first category of people, I come from Jerusalem, I'm a Jerusalemite, and I work in the West Bank. I have previous working experience in Gaza where I used to go meet with my colleagues, create stress, not only for the minds of Palestinians, but for the minds of those who watch from distance a televised genocide. The fact that you choose to come today and not to turn your face away from Palestine means that you are maintaining the fabric of humanity that connects between all of us. Today, I'm supposed to talk about the role of mental health professionals, the ethical commitment, the professional commitment in difficult times like the time we're going through in Palestine. And to put it very briefly, I would say, understanding those who suffer not only from the perspective of the biomedical, but also the social and political, and to extend our role beyond the clinic to be participants in advocacy and to practice a critical human right-based approach to mental health. So that's the key message of this talk. Now let me delve into it slowly. Let me first take you to a quick tour, a quick visit to my clinic. I will share with you a few cases that I observed in Palestine over the past 600 days of genocide. Do you hear me? Or okay. The first category of people, I come from Jerusalem, I'm a Jerusalemite, and I work in the West Bank. I have previous working experience in Gaza where I used to go meet with my colleagues, create strategies, national mental health strategies, suicide prevention strategies for Palestine, and also train professionals, including emergency room doctors, who will contribute in suicide prevention, general doctors and nurses who meet people with mental health suffering in primary health care, and to create a school-based mental health program. And I observed how this system completely collapsed within the first weeks of violence in Gaza. And I wrote to The Lancet a paper that was published in November 23, explaining the collapse of the system and how it is impossible for mental health professionals to do what they are trained to do in difficult times like this, with no safe place. It's extremely difficult to conduct the traditional interventions that we are trained to do. So I was left with this dilemma. What can we do in these times? Now back to the clinic and what we observed in the clinic. The first category of patients that I observed are young people from Jerusalem and the West Bank, brought to my clinic by their parents because they have experienced significant changes in their eating habits. Some of them stopped eating because they feel nauseated. Others felt that flour and meat is so disgusting. Some started hoarding bottles of water and food cans. I'm talking about Jerusalem and the West Bank. Many lost severe weight. The first thing that one can think of when you see a cachectic girl with very fragile hair, an adolescent, is anorexia nervosa. But this was not anorexia nervosa. This was not eating disorder. This was disordered eating in reaction to starvation in Gaza, in reaction to the starvation of political prisoners. One of those girls who came to see me, her father was politically detained, and she told me that all what I know about my father, that we haven't heard anything about him for months, and all what I know is that political prisoners are starved and sexually harassed. So this is a new category that I have not observed over my 20 years of practice in Palestine. In reaction to the events in Gaza, we started observing something new. Another category is a category of young women who just gave birth or who are pregnant. They came with depression, with severe anxiety. Now, it's not uncommon to see women with postpartum depression, but the attribution is different this time, because they are attributing their depression to feelings of guilt and regret, because they are bringing vulnerable beings to our unsafe world. And I want to tell you about a boy, 13-year-old boy, brought by his mother. The mother wanted me to medicate him, give him Ritalin, because he's not paying attention. Teachers say he doesn't pay attention in school. I chatted with the boy, and he explained to me that he was good at school. I reviewed his previous grades. He had good performance in the past. He explains to me that his school in Jerusalem finally accepted the Israeli-imposed curricula. The school had two options, either to be closed or to accept the Israeli curriculum. His mother refused to send him to another school outside Jerusalem because she doesn't want him to cross checkpoints and to be harassed by soldiers. So his only way to show defiance and protest is by chatting with his classmate, putting his head on the desk, and deliberately not paying attention. And he could have been misdiagnosed as a boy with PTSD. For those of you who read Arabic, have a look at a page from the new curriculum. So this page says, it's about, the title is Our New Neighbor Yossi. It's about Yossi. Yossi is a typical Israeli name, who's a little boy who comes to a neighborhood in Jerusalem, and the father, the Palestinian father, is the Jerusalemite father, is telling his son to welcome Yossi because he seems to be a shy boy. What the lesson doesn't tell us is that Yossi and his family are settlers, colonialists, coming to enjoy colonial privileges in Jerusalem over the native population. So our children in Jerusalem have to study these things without any protest and critical thinking. And their protest and deliberate inattention can be misunderstood. Another group that I observe now is a group of parentified children. And to give you an idea, look at this child. Children who take on their shoulders the burden of adults. The violence has made many parents absent, physically absent, because they are either politically detained or killed or amputated, or psychologically absent because they are traumatized, a grieving mother for her son or for her husband. In that situation, the eldest in the family tries to replace the absent father. And sometimes I see girls trying to comfort their mother, boys trying to take the authority of the father over his siblings. One last example. This is my simple statistics for one day. I worked in my clinic following the assassination of the Lebanese leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Out of 16 patients that I saw on that day, 5 chose to talk about this assassination and its impact. Those people come usually to talk to me about their marital problems, their troubles at school or at work, but a political event, an important political event, can superimpose on their personal stories. I share this to tell you that the political becomes very personal and very psychological. One of these people told me, I grieve for Hassan Nasrallah more than I grieved for my father. So to understand our situation and the cases that I work with, I want to bring this quote from Ignatius Martin Barrow, who says briefly that trauma is socially produced. And in order to respond to trauma, we need to work with the social conditions that produce this trauma. In Palestine, you can replace this word with political instead of social. It's politically produced, and we need to deconstruct the political situation that contributes to the oppression. Now, how many of you here come because they are interested in mental health? And how many of you come here because they are interested in Palestine? And I guess you are not novice to the Palestinian situation. I will not delve too much in the history, but I will share the things that help you understand the impact of politics on the person, of the individual. This is the famous map of Palestine. And Palestinians who live in the territories now, in the so-called Palestinian territories, are 1/3 of the Palestinian population. 2/3 of the Palestinian population are abroad, are expelled. And those who continue living in the territories, they live on no more than 9% of the land that we call historical Palestine. We are talking about very small geography that is discontinuous, fragmented. And this is a close look at the Palestinian territories. And as you can see, within this bean shape, the West Bank, there is further fragmentation. There is area A and B and C, and there is Gaza Strip, and there is Jerusalem. I come from Jerusalem. Each community, so this geographical fragmentation has created different communities, and each community has its challenges and its social and political determinants of health. Examples. In Jerusalem, people like me are citizens of nowhere in the world. We have a laissez-passer, a travel document that allows us to go around, and this is the concrete thing on paper, our identity. But many have real issues with their identity at a psychological level. In the West Bank, where settlements spread in Area C, we noticed a severe drop out from school because children they feel unsafe going to school and being attacked by settlers. Those are just very light examples of how this fragmentation affects the well-being and the health and the choices of people. And Gaza has a different story. But what's common between these different communities is that everywhere, of course, there are specific descriptions for every community, but everywhere we have a very small number of mental health professionals. There is high prevalence of mental health complaints and mental health problems. NGOs provide most of the mental health response to crisis situation, but unfortunately, they adopt a biomedical approach to mental health. And often they dismiss the lack of justice and human rights and the political situation that creates the crisis. And they exhibit a misunderstanding of the meaning of neutrality and impartiality. Neutrality and impartiality is understood, according to them, is that we need to be quiet about torture, we need to be quiet about genocide, because if we use these terms, this will affect the donation. But that's not the real meaning of neutrality and impartiality. Neutrality, as I understand it, is that I treat my patient whether I like him or not, whether I agree with him or not, whether he's evil or good. And I should speak up about the conditions that generate suffering and psychological pain. A quick overview of the everyday suffering in Palestine over the last century, over the last decades, I would say, not before we talk about the situation in Gaza and the escalation in Gaza. The most common experience of distress comes from checkpoints. Every Palestinian has to go through checkpoints. Nowadays, there are 900 checkpoints across the West Bank. And this is how people go through the checkpoints to their work, to their university. And this experience is literally suffocating. Sometimes, on a few occasions, people suffocated when they went through the checkpoint. Some luckier ones, like myself, I go around the checkpoint, through the checkpoint by car. And again, I have to spend long hours. Sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 6 hours. going from Jerusalem to the West Bank. No one can escape this. So you can imagine the robbery of time, the impairment of the quality of life that touches every Palestinian. Another common experience is political detention. This experience touches at least 20% of the Palestinian population. This is almost 38% of the male population. And usually, it starts when the person is the minor. And it has reverberations. It is designed, all the details of political detentions are designed to damage the individual, to teach the minor a lesson that you cannot raise your head. If you want to live here, you live on your knees. Literally, some boys that I worked with told me that in the Russian compound around Jerusalem, they were told by the interrogator, now I will take you to room number 4. Do you know what's room number 4? It's a room to which you go on 2 legs, but you come out of it on 4. So literally, they try to bring people, and metaphorically, on 4, where they lose their agency, where they lose their sense of human with these experiences. And of course, it has an impact on the family. The family that feels guilty because they could not prevent that from happening. One boy told me, the prison guard is better than my father, an adolescent who spent time in prison. And I told him, explain, please tell me, explain that to me. So he tells me, my father, who acted like a tough father, and he used to discipline me whenever I come after sunset at home, when the soldiers entered to arrest me, he was like a rabbit. He could not move. He could not do anything. So this moment of political detention of a minor from home and sometimes from school, in the presence of the teacher and the principal, it shatters, it damages the image of the father, the image of the protective adults. And those children, when they go back to their ordinary life, they have issues with their father. In the few cases when the father tried to prevent political detention, the political detention of his minor, they were shot at and killed. Mothers and fathers were killed when they tried to protect children from political detention. And you can see the image. You will have a troop of soldiers armed to their teeth, going after an unarmed small adolescent. So the image is, there is an exaggeration in the use of power that aims to leave this impact on the individual, on the family, and on the Palestinian society, because when we know that political detention is so common, people feel intimidated, and they need to think many times before they verbalize their feelings and express their action. And this is a report that mainly about solitary confinement, and it explains how solitary confinement is designed to make people become psychotic. When a person is detained, he is told that your comrades, your cousins, your classmates informed about you. This disturbs their trust. When they are left for days and weeks and months in solitary confinement, they start telling us how their stomach talked to them, how their intestine informed them that this particular neighbor informed about them. So people lose their minds in solitary confinement. A third common experience is home demolition. And home demolition does not aim to only deprive you of the physical structure, but of the memories, of the attachment, of the container, of the relationships that developed in that place. And it is not taking place only in Gaza, where we see massive home demolition. 95% of the homes are destroyed now in Gaza. But in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, every day, there is home demolition here and there. There are many restrictions on the expansion of the Jerusalemite population in order to manipulate the demography. And if you are a Jerusalemite family and you have a baby, a new child, and you want to expand your home a little bit, the laws prevent you from doing so. And if you do it against the law, they will force you to demolish your home. They will demolish your home and make you pay fines, or you demolish it on your own and you don't pay the fines. So it's a very common and damaging experience. A few words about Gaza before the exacerbation of violence over the past 600 days. In Gaza, we count the life of an individual, the life of children, with how many wars they have witnessed. So now a 15-year-old in Gaza is 5 war-old. And before this escalation, unemployment, poverty, food insecurity, anemia were sky high. So the kind of trauma that children experience with anemia and food insecurity is developmental trauma that doesn't allow your brain to grow as if you had all your basic needs met. And here I want to say something about all the research that was published about PTSD in Palestine, because I think this confuses the picture. Because in a place like Gaza and in Palestine in general, we are never in the post phase. Trauma is continuous, accumulating. It is historical. It can best be described as colonial trauma. And for children, it affects the development to a great extent. PTSD best captures the experience of American soldiers. And soldiers, any soldier who will go back to safety. A resident in Palestine doesn't go back to safety. He stays under bombardment, under threat. So avoidance, in the case of the American soldier going back to California, avoidance is a pathological symptom. For a man in Gaza who's avoiding whatever he can avoid, this is an adaptive response. This is not a psychopathological one. Now, the escalation of violence in Gaza. We see the massive bombardment. The bombs that were thrown on Gaza are like 7-8 times more than the bombs that were thrown on Hiroshima. But there is a special tactic this time. Massive destruction of the health system, killing over 1,400 health workers. And this targeting reveals the intention to inflict the most killing that they can, the utmost killing that they can inflict on Palestinians, so that if you don't die due to bombardment, you will die due to your infected wounds that are not treated, your chronic diseases that are left without medications. I heard an ophthalmologist talking about thousands of people who lose their vision because their diabetes has been neglected over the 600 days. So you can imagine that this is another tool of plausible genocide, targeting the health system. And the third tool is weaponized starvation. There were 2 waves in April, May, June, July 24, and these days are like the 3rd month, almost we're getting into the 3rd month of starvation and preventing basic needs from entering Gaza. There are around 400 reported cases of very young children or elderly people who lost their life due to famine, due to hunger, lack of food. Images of humiliation and experiences of humiliation are very common in Palestine, but yet they are not considered to be as symptoms of trauma. And we will come to the definition of trauma according to the Bible of psychiatrists, which doesn't take humiliation into consideration. But before we go to the definitions, I want to bring to your attention this important paper that was published in July 24 from The Lancet. And basically, it questions the numbers of casualties in Gaza, saying that the real number of casualties is like 4.6 times the announced numbers, because there are many people missing and many people are left to die for what seems to be like natural causes, like chronic diseases, heart attacks, but this is influenced by the situation there. According to their logic, we estimate that the number of dead people due to this violence in Gaza to be 250,000 in a population of 2.2 million. Now, this might be most interesting for mental health professionals, but I think, I hope it can be stimulating for others as well. Our problem with the Western approach to mental health, because I think that mental health can be another tool of hegemony, another tool to control. Because if we apply the Western approach to mental health in Palestine, we will end up over-pathologizing people. And already the image, the representation of Palestinians in the West is either barbaric terrorists or mentally sick people. In both cases, we lose credibility. People don't take us seriously. So we need to be very careful when we apply the Western approach to mental health in Palestine. Let's examine the definition of trauma first, the DSM definition of trauma, which talks about actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Sexual violence was newly introduced to the definition. Now, this leaves many people with severe experiences outside the definition. I want to give you examples. If you are a Palestinian woman, political prisoner, and you need sanitary pads, but the guardians will not give you the pads until you kiss the Israeli flag or dance to the national anthem. This is not physical injury, and maybe there is no threat of physical injury, but this experience can be equally damaging to the person. If you are an old Palestinian man who spent his time farming and planting olive trees and taking care of your olive trees, the burning of your olive grove can be as painful as killing one of your sons. So there are extreme painful experiences that are disregarded in the Palestinian situation. Humiliation is the most common Palestinian trauma. And for mental health professionals, you can check this paper if you want to see a specific approach to the treatment of experiences of humiliation. Also, the definition of the WHO, which is the WHO definition of mental health, cannot fit the Palestinian experience perfectly. Cannot fit the Palestinian experience perfectly. So it takes the experiences of an individual and it dismisses the collective experience. In Palestine, as I explained earlier, we see young girls with eating disorder in Jerusalem in reaction to Gaza. In Palestine, people talk about the collective mood, the pulse of the street. So we feel interconnected, and what's happening to other people is affecting not only the individual, but individuals are affected by what's happening for other people. Okay, it's tricky.
Yeah.
And then the definition talks about productivity. How can we measure the productivity of people when unemployment is very high? And the fruitful contribution to your community. What if you are a Palestinian within Israeli occupied areas, so-called Israeli Arab, and you are ambivalent about the contribution to the community? So this is just to point to some shortcomings of these definitions, which sometimes underdiagnose and sometimes overdiagnose people. These observations make me suggest the term psychological imperialism. The assumption that the research that was developed in the dominant North, Western countries, US and Europe, is applicable everywhere. Now, I'm not dismissing the research and the wisdom that is coming from the West, but I'm arguing about its massive applicability. A vast majority of what is published about mental health comes from the West. Very little to nothing comes from the global South. And some people might think because we are lazy, we are not doing our work. But that's not the perfect answer, because there are many disparities. Because people in crisis time, like in Palestine, we are overwhelmed with the load of work. We don't have the financial luxury to invest in research. If a person wants to go to if a professional wants to share their research in journals, many journals ask for a payment now. And if you want to present in an international conference, this might be the salary of that professional many times for a few months to make the trip and present in an international conference. So we need to consider justice in epistemology. Michel Foucault spoke about subjugated knowledge. Our experiences are being dismissed as anecdotes and stories because they are not randomized controlled studies. The lack of sensitivity to this reality is psychological imperialism, which is another tool of hegemony in the world. Without delving too much into this, I will just name them and give you an example. There are many things. This list is not exhaustive. There are many more things to question about the Western assumptions in mental health. One of them is positivism, scientific research, individualism, while dismissing the experience of the community. So the expectation that if I come from Gaza, I will be sick and she will be sick, for example, and ignoring that the relationship between us might be exhausted by the experience. So there is something about the connection that is not going all right. Hedonism, the joy. So if you lack joy and interest, we might think that you are depressed or you have one of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. But if you are oppressed, if you are colonized, you might suffer from anhedonia. and yet you are not depressed. The sickness is within your context, not between your ears, not in your skull. And the homeostatic approach suggests that you should go to the pre-morbid situation. We treat you to go back to the situation before the latest one. But in historical trauma like the Palestinian one, people want to change power structures. We don't want to go to pre-genocidal experience. And the political neutrality that we mentioned earlier. So, applying Western approach in mental health ends up telling us, those are researches made by Save the Children and the World Bank, and they were made in 2019, 2018. So they tell us that 80% of children in Gaza are depressed. 70% of people in the West Bank or Gaza are depressed. What does that suggest? Shall we treat them with antidepressants and individual therapy, interpersonal therapy? Or shall we deal with the situation, with the context, with the power structure that is generating all that suffering? So in these researches, usually you don't have a Palestinian in the research team, or you have a Palestinian who's not a mental health professional, just a token Palestinian to make you believe that this is a collaborative research. And they distribute a survey that, for example, the well-being questionnaire of the WHO, which asks people, how have you been doing over the past week? Did you sleep well? Did you feel refreshed in the morning? Were you productive? Did you enjoy the time? And if you score poorly, they will conclude that you have depression. So these questionnaires do not distinguish between psychological pain, social and political distress, and clinical depression. And we need to be very careful when we deal with these results. I want to share this example also coming from an Israeli emergency room. This is the diagnosis of a woman from Jerusalem. In the morning, they came to demolish her home. She started crying and shouting and hyperventilating. Then she developed numbness around the mouth and carpopedal spasm, and she fainted. The family took her to the emergency room. At the emergency room, they are not interested in listening to her story. They examine her heart. They do all the necessary investigations. They don't find an organic cause, so they diagnose her with emotionally unstable personality. In this encounter, they can say something about her personality. So that's the kind of pathologizing that can happen. One more example about the assumption of. I will try to.
No, take your time.
Okay. So one more example. Have you heard of the attachment theory? How many of you have heard of the attachment theory? Mary Ainsworth. If you have a responsive mother, you will have a secure attachment that you will take to the kindergarten and then to school and then to your future relationship. And if you don't have secure attachment, then we need to question the relationship with the mother, the early connections. What if you come from a marginalized community, an occupied community, and your mother is responsive as much as possible to you, but the world is not responsive to your mother or to you? You will not have a secure attachment, and it is not all about your mother. So that's the kind of questioning that we need to make. I can think also of immigrants. If you work with immigrants, if you're an immigrant, if your family comes from Iraq or Yemen, or a place where there is trauma, and you come here, you need therapy, you go to a Western therapist that doesn't know anything about the situation in Yemen or Syria or Iraq. And you tell your therapist about your mother who wants you to succeed, she puts so high standards on you, and she's angry with you if you perform poorly at school. She doesn't show sufficient empathy. The therapist will tell her your mother is a narcissist, and she will hate her mother. But maybe the mother is traumatized. She doesn't show empathy because she's traumatized. She puts high standards because she wants you to survive, because she felt the precarity of her situation. So this is an invitation for all of you. Not only, you don't need to work under occupation to think of this way. Wherever you are, think of the marginalized. Think of people with diverse experiences. And question the Western hegemony in mental health. This is an image of the Israeli psychiatric hospital where I'm supposed to hospitalize a patient with acute psychosis or suicidal ideation, for example. And as you see, it is built on Deir Yassin land. Deir Yassin is the place where one of the most important massacres of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians took place in 1948. And yet, it is expected to be the place where we treat people from their psychological problems. More about pathologization and the danger of pathologization. Here we have an Israeli trauma expert who tells us that the society in Gaza, the people of Gaza, are sociopaths. And she lives in Sderot, in the envelope of Gaza. And she says that I don't feel comfortable living a few kilometers from a society of sociopaths. Sociopaths you cannot treat. This language paves the way for genocidal acts. And in the middle is an image from 70 years ago. This is one of the FLN leaders, the liberation movement in Algeria. He was caught by the French police and he was executed. But they arranged the scene to make believe that he committed suicide. Al-Arabi bin Mahdi, his name is Al-Arabi bin Mahdi. Only recently Macron admitted that this man was executed and we made believe that he committed suicide. And this last image is an image of one of the Palestinian hunger strikers who managed to free himself from administrative detention 5 times. But on the 6th time, there was a change in the Israeli government and Ben Gvir became responsible for the prison system. So he left him in his cell until he died. And when he died, Israeli media reported that this man wanted to die and he committed suicide. In our culture, to say that this person committed suicide is an attack on his status as a leader. It is a damage for him as a role model because people don't want to admire or follow the steps or look highly at someone who committed suicide. So again, pathologization is being used. And if you know something about about the history of medicine and mental health, it's full of examples of pathologization. Drapetomania was the diagnosis that psychiatrists gave for black people who wanted to free themselves from enslavement. For the white psychiatrist, this was a crazy man leaving the comfort of the White House, the White Home, and trying to leave. The Soviet Union diagnosed the opponents with sluggish schizophrenia. Frantz Fanon spoke about the North African syndrome that describes the laziness of those people who were slow and lazy to contribute to the industrial development of their colonizers. So, and this language is not only from the past, it is still well and alive, and that's another message for mental health professionals, we need to be critical and to be vigilant when this kind of language and this approach is being used against occupied, marginalized people.
When you talk about psychopaths are born, okay, and it's a very small percentage in the population. Sociopaths are made, and they're being indoctrinated, is that how you say it? You know, since they're babies. And I'm sick and tired of the fact that no one is holding them accountable for it.
Okay, maybe we'll stop it here. So how do we deal with this, with our situation? Tell me if I need to finish.
No, we have until 1, so
all right.
Take your time.
Excellent. We in Palestine, mental health professionals, talk about the ethics of non-neutrality. Ethics of non-neutrality. It is not acceptable to be silent about the conditions, the psychosocial, political conditions that create human suffering. We see it as an extension of our role outside the clinic to document, to testify, to document, to challenge, to advocate, to mobilize in order to minimize the conditions that keep generating traumatized people and people who suffer psychologically, people in psychological pain. This is an example, a paper that I published in the Middle East Eye in response to American mental health institutions, the APA, that acknowledged the trauma of Israeli people and stayed silent about 1 century of trauma for Palestinians. In Palestine, we flatten the hierarchy of mental health services. We design interventions that involve educators, nurses, general doctors. We don't wait for people to come to our specialized practices, specialized clinics. We go out in the field. We promote community interventions. In my activities, I trained sport coaches, Aikido coaches, ex-prisoners, religious figures to respond, to provide an adequate mental health response to trauma situation. And we inform the world, the scientific community, about what's taking place. We try to challenge being a minority. It's not easy. It's not easy given the little resources that we have, but we try to publish and to centralize Palestine in our profession, not only in political discourse, but in the professional scientific discourse. And I want to tell you, colleagues, that we cannot treat what we don't acknowledge. And here I want to quote from Rosemary Sire, an anthropologist who studied the history of trauma in the West, mainly in American academia, in academia in the US. And she concluded that the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of 2/3 of the Palestinian people, and the taking of the majority of the land of historic Palestine is not considered to be a historical trauma. And with this exclusion, with this absenteeism and negation, we will continue talking about PTSD and treat individuals for PTSD. But if we understand that we are talking about historical colonial trauma, our approach will change completely. And this is how we conceptualize our trauma. This is a work that I did with my colleague, Zainab Hinnawi. And here we try to explain that the trauma of the Palestinians is a protracted trauma over 1 century. And it doesn't only affect masses of individuals, it also affects relationships. It does not only produce hypervigilance, re-experiencing, and avoidance. It also damages the connection, the relations, producing internalized oppression, fascination with the aggressor, fratricide, feminicide, the violence that we don't respond to, the vertical violence that we fail to respond to effectively, will not disappear. It will be internalized and it will be expressed against weaker members of the society, those with disabilities, with mental health problems, with gender diversity, women. And Western psychiatry, Western mental health has not provided us with any effective tools to deal with this kind of trauma. The contrary, it's the contrary. When they observe that, gender-based violence is high in Palestine, this is an evidence that there is something wrong about the nature of these people. So the observations that are directly related to the divide and conquer, to the chronic oppression that can be expressed in the society are taken as an evidence, as a pretext to disregard these people and to perpetuate a dehumanized image of them. For that, we need also to be very vigilant. And of course, we propose a different, an alternative, a complementary approach to treatment. I will mention a few things here. One of them is the importance of seeking truth. Because when people are defeated militarily and politically, we get confused. The narrative of the oppressor will become victorious, and we will, if we feel defeated, we will not do our contribution in revealing the truth. And I think that even if Palestinians don't win this unjust confrontation with the Israelis, we should not give up on our intellectual resistance. We should continue our intellectual resistance, refusing the narrative that is being made about us. For that, we borrow from liberation psychology in Latin America, conscientization, critical awareness. We need to dialogue within oppressed groups to create a different discourse and to make sure that we don't lose the intellectual battle. Global solidarity is very nourishing for Palestinian resistance, and it has a healing effect. When I work with a woman who is a victim of sexual harassment or rape, I cannot undo the rape, but I provide acknowledgement, validation, support, witnessing, and it matters. People will be double wounded if the bypasser, the spectators, don't pay attention, if they turn their face the other way. So international solidarity is very important and very therapeutic for Palestinians. When I saw the system crushing, the mental health services crushing in Gaza, it was a moment of humbleness for me. We thought that we built a modest but effective system. But it was a right moment for me to observe what do people do in order to help themselves. And we saw them grounding themselves in spiritual and cultural notions like sumud and ribat. This is our version of psychological resilience and resistance. We saw a teacher trying to help little kids not to become illiterate, teaching them to read and write. Another person giving a chance to children to chant songs. A group of women trying to find verses from Islamic literature to support each other in dire times. So people, if we leave them alone, they will find a way to express the virtues of the community and to support each other. We need to be supporters and facilitators for this process. When our traditional tools fail to be functional. Listening groups and healing circles are also very important. This is a collective trauma, and individual therapy is not sufficient for it. We cannot put every Palestinian on therapy chair, but we can create a therapeutic space for them. Many of their experiences are unspeakable, so we should not rely only on talking and verbalizing. Many people cannot put words on their painful experiences. So we need to create spaces for and tools for expression, sculpture, drawing, narrating, dancing. In these spaces, participants can reflect, digest, integrate, learn, and transcend. And people can reconnect, relate, and belong. This is one example of an intervention that we created that invests in the symbol of kites in the Palestinian society. The kites are very present in children's songs, in children's literature. When the separation wall created barriers between neighbors and family members, children used kites to connect with their neighbors. And now, kites can express the loss of homes, of family members, of beloved ones. So this intervention allows people little children, little boys and girls, to create kites. It's an expression of agency. They do this work together using white paper. They write whatever they want. They draw whatever they want. They fly it outside, and they come back to a space of reflection and talk about the experience and the symbol of the experience for themselves. This is an example of culturally and contextually relevant intervention. You know, I come from Palestine, from the Holy Land, from Jerusalem, and we have the story of ascension of Jesus Christ after being torn and tortured and crucified. We have the story of a similar story from the Islamic literature about Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, where there is a similar ascension for the Prophet after a year of sorrow. So the symbol of ascension, of flying a kite, culturally is connected with dealing with your pain, transcending the pain. We see many initiatives that encourage people to plant and to take care of a plant in the memory of those that we lost. And we are trying to create a support group for women who lost family members that is based around planting. This is an image from Jenin, and this horse was built in 2002 following the invasion and the massacre of Jenin. The children of the dead fathers gather in an activity to express their grief, and they made of the debris of ambulances that were shelled at that time, they created this horse to commemorate the death and the sacrifices. And this horse moved around, and then it settled at the roundabout in Jenin. And it has been there for 20 years. Last year, Israelis decided to damage the symbol. They confiscated the horse. It reminds me of Marco Cavallo in Italy. And in the book, you will see a text comparing the horse of Jenin with Marco Cavallo. Those are the notions, the cultural notions of sumud and ribat that are being politicized, psychologized in order to make sense and to connect people, to help people being grounded in their culture and in their spiritual values at this time. And this is another article that argues that resistance, and here I'm talking about a wide spectrum of ways of resistance, is also therapeutic. Because remember, one of the definitions of trauma is that it is the disaster of helplessness. Colonial trauma is deliberate. It is made to exterminate as many as possible and to make those who watch freeze in pain, lose their agency, become helpless. So any action against this helplessness is therapeutic. And we should not forget the healing effect of justice. Justice has a healing effect. In the West, you like a lot to talk about peace, but peace benefits the oppressor because they will take colonial privileges and stay in peace. We are interested in justice and the healing effect of justice. And I'm very thankful for the government of South Africa that decided to walk through a process of justice for Palestinians. I think they learned it on their skin, the importance of justice, not only the rhetoric about peace. And maybe I'll finish with this slide that emphasizes the therapeutic role of solidarity. It is felt by Palestinians, it is psychologically helpful, yet we need to discuss and strategize for solidarity so that it will become politically effective, because solidarity is sluggish. Usually it took us 600 days before a few European countries, excluding Italy, issued a decree saying that, oh, Netanyahu is exaggerating. It took us 600 days because international solidarity, it is psychologically important for Palestinians, but yet politically not very effective. Even in countries that so-called democracies, you cannot transcend your voices vertically to affect decision makers and regimes. So a lot needs to be said about how to render solidarity effective at a political level. Thank you very much for listening. I'll stop now. Thank you. Maybe we should take questions. Question time. Q&A. So shall I take a few questions and answer them, or?
After each question, you can answer if you want, or you want to listen.
No, that's fine. If this is if it's within the panel, let me take one question at a time, and then with the audience, we'll take 2, 3, 4 at a time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samah Jabr. It was really a pleasure to learn from you. And I think it's those moments where we speak with who is involved in colonial trauma have to be more and more. You spoke about the essential connection between the social, political, and historical context and mental health. A connection that you cannot ignore when working with individuals whose lives are profoundly shaped by colonial dynamics and whose stories intertwined with the realities come to the attention of our health professionals. The first question we thought to share with you is about Holocaust and the Nakba. At the starting of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in 1948. And when we think about this, when we think about the connection between those closely linked events, We cannot ignore the fact that the premise of kindly expelling a persecuted minority from Europe and enabling them to take possession of another people's land implicitly positioned the Palestinian population on an even more marginalized level within existing hierarchies of discrimination. Both the Holocaust and the Nakba implicate Europe, which today often evades historical responsibility by describing the issue as complex. What happened and continues to happen to Palestinian people is frequently erased, obscured, or deliberately ignored. In examining how the Holocaust is taught and remembered in European schools and public discourse, we rightly find a necessary condemnation of the genocide perpetrated against Jewish people. However, the ongoing violence, dispossession, and genocide in Palestine are routinely suppressed, denied, or censored. You mentioned the trauma history. It was really important. And this disparity, as well as the erasure of European colonial history, raises important questions. Our current frameworks for teaching and remembering history continue to reflect structural, colonial, and racial biases, recognizing one form of suffering while erasing another, highlighting one narrative while silencing another. At a political level, this is a part of a long and painful history, in which colonial legacies and racial hierarchies remain interwoven. Psychologically, it raises complex questions about how historical trauma are internalized and reproduced, including the identification with former aggressors. We will both be interested in hearing your reflection on this perspective and how may it inform our understanding of justice and memory.
So I will try to give a short answer for this important and long question. I think that Europe has not learned the right lesson from the Holocaust. They have not learned that racism, no matter where it is directed, is wrong and not permissible. They just shifted their racism to other populations. So the regret about the Holocaust did not prevent them from, did not trigger them to say something about events in Palestine. The contrary, it's the contrary. Because of their guilt about the Holocaust, they permitted so much harm to come upon Palestinians. The anti-Semitism was projected towards another category and called, in light lexic, in lighter vocabulary, Islamophobia. Anti-Semitism became a high-ranking crime, and there are special laws that speak about anti-Semitism as if it is different than other forms of racism. And the racism against the Muslim population, which is an overarching problem that is also allowing the harm that is coming upon Palestinians, is being minimized by giving it a name that looks like an anxiety, phobia. It's a phobia, Islamophobia. I don't see how Islamophobia is different than anti-Semitism. And yet, anti-Semitism is now criminalized, and the voices of those people who don't accept the harms that are happening to Palestinians are being silenced with the accusation of anti-Semitism, and at the same time, a lot of harm is being permitted in a reaction to the guilt that Europe has integrated from their experience. So I think Europe has to deal with their guilt feeling, and they should learn the right lesson. And the right lesson is that human beings are equal. Racism is wrong no matter where it is directed, and there is no ranking in human pain and human suffering. All of it is not permissible. And one last thing that I want to ask you regarding your question. I know that there is overemphasis of the Holocaust in school curricula. Do you teach anything about Italian colonization of Libya and other parts in Africa? Okay.
You spoke about yeah, you spoke about also the weaponization of
Vediamo questo. Arriva il filo. Arriva qua.
You spoke about the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and I think it's very interesting. And also about the hidden colonial European history. And I think those are important points. Another question was about the colonial care. And the question is connected with this elimination of colonial history. We live in a context where oppressed groups, in line with European colonial history, are often essentialized or sexualized, and this is clear, for example, when dealing with the gender violence that you nominated before. The same happens for the evaluation of genitoriality, for example, that is evaluated without considering the context or the history behind the parents' distress. From a decolonial perspective, it's expanding the reflection to include migrants from contexts where colonial history plays a significant role in shaping their narratives. How can we implement a truly decolonial approach to mental health in light of the limitation and the non-universality of Western epistemologies? What are the prospects for a more fertile, culturally grounded healthcare, psychology and psychiatry? What practices can we incorporate into our daily work to dismantle coloniality and promote mental well-being based on your experience as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist? What has been most effective in supporting this vision?
We need to ask ourselves a very simple question. How do we know what we know? How do we know the things that we know about people? From research? What's the methodology of that research? Where is it developed? Which population? So if we are curious about epistemology, I think it will help us see clearer the picture of our practices. I think also a general interest in to understand that the decolonial approach does not belong only to the South and to countries in problems, because many people come here and many people here live in marginalization, and much of the modalities of therapy that are suitable for people who are financially comfortable are not suitable for those who are financially who belong to classes with financial disparities. We need to expand our education for mental health professionals to include, we should expand the social and political aspect of biopsychosocial model in therapy. And I teach a course on critical human right approach. Most of the people who attend this, it's an online course, are internationals. All of them tell me that they didn't have anything like that in university. So we need to think of a curricula that matches with the needs of those whose human rights are violated, who live in situations when there is no justice. And on the one hand, it is very intuitive. I think everyone realizes that lack of justice harms your brain. Even there are very simple experiences made on animals where you do an ultimatum studies, or you have dogs and give some dogs something to eat and you don't give the other dog, and you see the agitation. You take PET scan and you see how the amygdala of the brain of a dog flares up when they observe injustice. So something that we know very intuitively, but yet in academia we don't talk about it. We don't teach it. We don't try to promote a human rights approach or a critical human rights approach. Our understanding of justice and violence in our practice is limited to children. For example, every doctor knows that if you have a child who is a victim of abuse or neglect, you need to inform. And sometimes, in certain countries, if you have a woman who is exposed to violence, we feel that you need to direct her to a place where she can seek support and empowerment. And yet, most of the mental health professionals tell you that if the person is a victim of political injustice, that's not my business. Neutrality and impartiality comes first. So I think a different approach in education, in supervision, in practice, will make mental health professionals more attentive to the violence that is crushing individuals, and will let them consider a role beyond their clinic where they need to inform about experiences of torture, for example. You know, some of the practices of doctors, let me tell you, in many countries, doctors write the fit for torture note. So doctors can be doctors and health professionals in general, including mental health professionals. They can be complicit in bad practices. In some countries, doctors contribute to force feeding of a person on hunger strike. We need to raise up our voices and remind medical students and psychology students about avoiding complicity with power structure and contributing critically to exposing these practices. It should start by academia and then practices, and we need to challenge mental health institutions who contribute to the silencing. I want to give you an example that happened here in Rome. A while ago, I came to Rome for the Global Mental Health Summit. Most of the participants represent big NGOs in mental health, international NGOs. Now, I know that they have been hushing the Palestinian voice for so long, telling us, you cannot talk about this, this is political, this is not within the interest of mental health professionals. That meeting, the Global Mental Health Summit, was opened by a political talk from Elena Zelensky. So the situation in Ukraine exposed the bias in mental health institutions regarding Palestinians, because they became outspoken about Ukraine. And previously and now, they are quiet about the situation in Palestine. We need to challenge our institutions and bring Palestine to their agenda and help them to be insightful about the racism that allows them to speak about certain conflicts and be quiet about others.
First of all, thank you very much. I have a brief question before opening up to the Q&A for everyone. And it's about trauma as a weapon of war, which is something that you've plenty to talk about during this presentation. You've talked about forms of humiliations, pesticide, symbolicide. You've talked about the horse. You've talked about the targeting of symbolic figures as Hassan Nasrallah. You've talked about humiliation, sexual violence. Something that I would like to get into and know more about in your research and work is the use of technologies of surveillance, which is something that as a researcher here in university with Lorenzo Pezzani we're looking at, especially surveillance in the context of border violence and migration here in Europe. And something that we came across quite often is the use of surveillance technologies within the Mediterranean. And often these technologies are technologies that are tested on the ground in Palestine and Gaza. Specifically, we've looked into the Heron drone, which is produced by the Israel aerospace industry. And we've seen how many of these technologies are not only tested on the ground, but often produced through the partnership between Italian universities and Israeli universities or Italian, let's say, military industry and the Israeli military industry. We have lots of examples also here in the University of Bologna. We sometimes face in interviews that we conduct with the migrants the trauma that is produced by the sound of the drone in the context of the Mediterranean. So whenever they hear the sound of the drone, they know that most often they're going to face a pushback and go back to Libya. But we also know that the sound, and we've seen this in the past year through lots of videos on Al Jazeera and other media outlets, that in Gaza, during the past 2 years, but also before that, you always have this constant buzzing that is, I imagine, also producing a certain trauma effect on people on the ground. So I wanted to ask you more about technologies, surveillance technologies, and possibly the effect of the sound on people.
Okay. Also, many questions in your question. Let me start by clinical observations, and then I will say something about the bigger picture. In my clinic, it's common to have a patient who comes and tells me, please take your computer out. Please don't let your mobile here. They leave their mobile away from the room where I examine them. And those people don't have paranoid schizophrenia. Those are rational people. Because every Palestinian knows that Israel exports software, spying software to the world, to Arab countries and to Europe as well. When some of the attacks took place in the Bataclan and different places in Europe, Israel introduced themselves as experts on dealing with trauma. They have been using Palestine and especially Gaza as a laboratory to develop tools of control and hegemony, and the artificial intelligence and spying technology is very common. Every Palestinian knows this, and they are careful about that. It is expressed in the clinical encounter. The buzzing and the music. I work with victims of torture and political detention, and the sound, the music, or the lack of sound, the sound isolation, are tools of torture. So now we heard more commonly that they play the Israeli national anthem all the time in certain prisons against political prisoners. So this is common. And people in solitary confinement, sometimes they have sound isolation to the point that they don't hear anything. And of course, this overstimulates the brain or deprives the brain in a way that contributes to the disorientation and psychological pain. And in Gaza, everyone complains of the sound of the drone because it is like, it preempts a strike. So when they hear it, they expect that there will be a strike. What we observed this time in this latest cycle of violence is the role of artificial intelligence, the lavender technology and other programs. So on certain attacks, we observed that 20 university professors were assassinated. On another attack, the chiefs of the families were assassinated. Parliament members were assassinated on another attack. So they use one button to inform AI to target certain group of people. And at the beginning, Palestinians observed this and they were asking what was going on. How come they assassinated a few university professors on the same day? And then it became clear that this is part of the work of artificial intelligence. And this should make scientists and people who are part of the development of artificial intelligence and technology very concerned about using these tools as tools for domination and for killing and for violence against human beings instead of tools to promote prosperity.
Thank you. We can collect maybe 2-3 questions. We can also help you translate if you feel more comfortable in Italian. And yeah. Vuole...
You don't have too much?
First of all, I really need to thank you for what you said. It's very meaningful to know who has. I'm a Giuliani, I'm a scholar, Italian colonialism, colonial memory, and racism and anti-racism in Italy. So I wanted to respond to your question and address the question to the public. So when we talk about colonial memory, it's basically expelled from any public discourse in Italy. In the public sphere, we do not talk about colonialism, and even less about colonial memory. Meaning that if you try to talk about what's the legacy of colonial mentality today in Italy, forget about it. Nobody's going to accept to talk about this issue, and the result is a laughter in your face. So yes, this is a problem, but there is also another problem which is more kind of transnational. Recently I've been talking about the anti-Semitism move in Italy, borrowing from an anti-racist, Jewish, anti-Zionist scholar, Alan Lentin, who was saying we are using anti-Semitism to justify anything that happens as a colonial move in our times. So Gaza, Palestine, is the result of the, let's say, the absence of the discomfort towards what is happening, what has always happened, is related to anti-Semitism, meaning that we conflate anti-colonialism, which doesn't mean anything in that sense, anti-colonialism and anti-racism with anti-Semitism, which means exactly the contrary. So I really believe that what we need to do at the moment in the public sphere, in Italy, in Europe, in the West, on the global north, and everywhere, is try to distinguish between anti-Semitism, anti-colonialism, and anti-racism. To profess yourself anti-Semitism, anti-anti-Semitic, doesn't mean to be anti-racist. The contrary. Because in a context, a political context where the Holocaust, which is the very product of selected memory, because the Holocaust is much more than that, is the very big guilt in Western memory. Anti-Semitism means basically to justify anything that is to protect a very anti-Semitic idea of the Jewish people, which is the idea that all Jewish people want to be in Israel. Ok, you understand what I mean? Adesso vado a fare la traduzione in italiano perché è molto importante. And then, of course, I'd like you to comment a little bit about that. But this is it's just to respond to what you addressed beforehand, because it's very, very important to understand that. Allora, voi sapete che in Italia non si parla di colonialismo italiano, non si parla di colonialismo sempre di qualcun altro. Nei libri di storia non ci si arriva mai, e nelle mie varie storie di vita, io sono stata anche una che ha contribuito ai libri di scuola superiore. E vi posso assicurare che di colonialismo non c'è niente, ossia si parla di colonialismo in modo statico, in modo che non ci implica, tantomeno di mentalità coloniale e dell'eredità della mentalità coloniale nel nostro paese. Quindi, quello che si fa è sostanzialmente delegare all'antisemitismo tutto il lavoro, mettendo dentro anche lo spirito anticoloniale e l'antirazzismo, e invece è tutto il contrario. Se noi riduciamo l'olocausto esclusivamente alla questione ebraica, quando non riusciamo a capire che non è solo una storia del popolo ebraico, ma è una storia che ha a che vedere con la costruzione di bianchezza a livello europeo, e oggi con i suprematisti bianchi dovremmo ricordarci costantemente, ok? E non sono alle porte, sono qui. Bene, se noi continuiamo a pensare all'olocausto come la grande colpa dentro l'armadio, rispetto alla quale l'unica cosa da fare è spogliarsi del senso di colpa, e quindi qualsiasi cosa viene fatto in nome dell'antisemitismo, non importa se poi ci sono moltissime persone che non sono sioniste, non importa. Noi sposiamo una causa, la riduciamo storicamente, gli diamo un solo significato, e quello che resta è che pensiamo che così siamo antirazzisti. Ma come siamo antirazzisti? In che senso? Cioè, se non riusciamo a decolonizzare il nostro spazio pubblico e a parlare, dire le cose, chiamarle col proprio nome, non andiamo lontano, e invece dobbiamo essere durissimi contro quello che sta succedendo, durissimi e molto presenti. Grazie a voi.
Thank you very much.
Grazie. Altre due domande? Lorenzo e
Is it okay? Yeah, to take one.
Sì.
Thanks. I won't repeat the extended thanks, but yeah, it's really heartfelt and it's important that you're here, so really appreciate it. My question was about the role of witnessing within a colonial context, in Palestine in particular, but also more broadly, and in particular about something you said about the relation of witnessing to truth and justice, and this comes from also something that you wrote, and you said today, but also you wrote very eloquently in several of your texts about how within the context of Palestine, violence and the trauma it generates is not a singular event, but it's a condition, right, that continues and repeats itself continuously, right? So if normally, I guess, one way of understanding witnessing is that, we witness because, we need them to speak out and to act against, a specific act of violence, right? Because we seek justice, because we have a certain kind of trust and relationship to a future of justice that, eventually we think it will come, right? So that idea of witnessing, I think, works quite well in a context when violence is, a more kind of singular event, right? But what happens, when, again, violence and the trauma that comes with it is this recurrent condition, How does witnessing, what is the meaning that witnessing counts and the function that it can play within that context? And I was also really inspired and struck by, how you connected it with the search of truth, right? Which is also like maybe a term that, sometimes it's kind of a bit looked with suspicion and rightly so, for in certain kind of context. But I'd like to understand, how you understand truth in this context and what it means for you and for the struggle in Palestine. Thank you.
Is there any other questions from?
Yeah, there's one from Martina. Sì, perché ne prendiamo 3 e poi rispondiamo e poi ne collezioniamo altre 3.
Thanks a lot for the brilliant talk. I was interested in in all the things you said, but in particular, I was particularly struck by what you said about this accumulation of trauma that goes together with this accumulation of memory in a way, so this fragmentation of memory, so these two parallel processes. And I'm wondering how do you see the political role of memory beyond commemoration, and what does it mean to build a collective memory beyond the Palestinian space about Palestine, starting from this accumulation of invisible and visible trauma, but in particular from this fragmentation, right? So what is the political memory the role of political memory? How do you see that in relation to this accumulation of trauma? And relatedly, I was particularly interested in one of your last point about resistance as healing. And I was wondering, how do you see, in your book that I was reading yesterday, I found that you really stress the way in which domination and violence is translated from a vertical to an horizontal level when there is no leeway for fighting this vertical domination. And so this peer-to-peer, this horizontality of domination that becomes extremely dangerous, in particular gender-wise. So I'm wondering if in this resistance as healing, you also see in the way in which has been enacted in Palestine, you see also in this very moment the room of maneuver for challenging this horizontalization of violence.
So it's easier for me to respond to your questions in the reverse order. I will start by your last point. So domination, violence, and the impact on the Palestinian society, and how to free ourselves from internalized oppression, from feminicide, fratricide, while opposing the occupation. Actually, we know that one of the tools of colonization is divide and conquer. And when people take a lot of aggression and violence that they cannot respond to, when they feel humiliated, when a Palestinian man is spit at or beaten at a checkpoint and he doesn't respond because he will be shot at and killed, and he goes home, if he doesn't have sufficient salt on his food, he will start shouting and become agitated. And the wife who takes his aggression and cannot respond to it, she will take it on the child. And this will become as a spiral. And this, I'm writing now a book on fratricide, explaining how solidarity groups get fragmented, why people kill each other, people who worked together as within the same ranks, within the same group, how they take their arms against each other. We see this, we observe this in every colonial reality. For example, in Algeria, there were the Harkis and the Mujahideen. In Lebanon, there were the resistant movements and the Antoine Lahd army. I was talking to Alia about the Sunni Shia clashes following the Iranian revolution. So it's part of the tactic of colonization, but also people who are defeated and humiliated by their defeat, they don't know what to do with that violence. They cannot take it anymore. So it's easier to express it against each other. And I want to say also that this is one of the most difficult things to talk about in Palestine for two reasons. It's like domestic violence. It brings a feeling of shame. And we fear to lose international solidarity because we assume that solidarity people like to see us united. They cannot understand all the complexities. So we should not talk about these things. And anything in the darkness will grow in a more dangerous way. It will just grow and mushroom without shedding any light on it, and we cannot treat it. That's why I decided to write about this. But it is part of the design of colonization, and then the dominated, the colonized, they are a fertile ground for sowing the seeds of conflict and fratricide among them. It's important to start talking about it and provide solution. Briefly, a few things about the remedy for this phenomenon. I think we should emphasize pluralism, critical thinking, humility, and dialogue within the oppressed. Dialoguing within the oppressed. This is a recommendation by Paulo Freire. Now, I will go back to your question and we'll combine it with the colonial memory. Your question about the memory of the colonized and colonial memory. Yeah, we'll try to respond to both. Another theme that comes from liberation psychology is the retrieval of history. The importance of the retrieval of history for the colonized, for the colonizer, and for the colonized. And interestingly, there is a famous slogan in Israeli literature. I think Palestinians here are aware of it. The old will die and the young will forget. Israeli politicians, they say, the old will die about Palestinians and the young will forget. But the retrieval of history is very important for the traumatized. We know that trauma damages our memory. Because we are traumatized, we avoid difficult subjects. And yet the retrieval of history is a tool for liberation, as we learn from liberation psychologists. And it is also a tool for transformation in a society that wants to examine its past. And I think the guilt in Europe about the Holocaust, they have guilt about the Holocaust, and they have amnesia to their colonial history. There are Italian people who are victims of the Nazi regime. Do they get compensated? They don't. So the compensation and the recognition is for certain group and for certain victims. There are different classifications. Without doing the colonial, without revisiting and doing the retrieval of history, I don't think that we can meet the question of Alia. She said, what about decolonial practices here? If we don't acknowledge the colonial past, how can we practice decolonial, how our practice can be decolonial? So it starts by revisiting the history and acknowledging the colonial past. An exercise that is important for everyone here, but I suggest that mental health professionals should lead this process, should encourage people to think about that, and this is part of the decolonial practice, to look into our history and examine it. And also in response to your question, I want to say that the problem in Europe, unfortunately, one of the reasons why Italy and other European governments identify with Israel, I talked about one, there are two big reasons. One of them is the guilt regarding the Holocaust, and the other one, the colonial past. So it's easier for them to identify with colonial practices that are committed by Israelis. Right and left are complicit in that. Not only the far right that is ruling, also the left are asleep. The left, for a while, they were fascinated with the kibbutz, with the kibbutzim. They were fascinated with the socialist appearance of the occupation. And until now, they are not seeing the reality. So, and I don't think, it will be too much to ask the marginalized group in solidarity to change the government. But I want to encourage you to start talking to the people in the left that are asleep. That will be a reasonable approach.
Yeah, there is this expression, colonialism by proxy.
Yeah.
Israel is our colonizers by proxy. So basically doing colonialism through someone else.
Yeah, yeah.
Perpetuating European colonialism through someone else.
And Italy is militarily connected with Israel. They are not critical about Israeli academia that is contributing effectively to the occupation in research, in producing artificial intelligence, technology, military. There is a holy connection between your universities and Israeli universities that no one should touch and criticize. And also Italian companies are involved in their interest in the gas, in the beach of Gaza. So those are three important projects to tackle in Italy. But again, you need to wake up from the negation of colonial past in order to be able to do this kind of work. Now, for your question about testimony. Israel has an interest in putting a cover, in putting a lid on the Palestinian experience. Palestinians have an interest in making the world see. Over the past 600 days, the violence was televised. No one could claim that they didn't see. And those who have seen cannot unsee what they have seen. In their practices with victims of political violence, when they arrest somebody, Israelis immediately close the eyes. The soldier closed the eyes of anyone that is detained. And surprisingly, over recently, we hear people who have been blindfolded for 40 days, for 2 months. This is unbelievable. I work with the victims of political detention for many years. It was not the practice. Now there are new protocols. But I think in their wish to close the eyes, why are the soldiers so keen on blindfolding Palestinian prisoners? Because our eyes and our regard threatens them. Because they don't want to be seen when they do what they do. And metaphorically, they are blindfolding the world. They don't want the world to see. We know that Gaza became a land prohibited for international journalism. And only the journalist who would go with an Israeli tank and whose reports will be checked by the army were allowed to report on Gaza because they don't want the world to see what they are doing. So witnessing becomes an act of resistance. And everyone from his position, from his corner, can witness. Lawyers can witness, journalists can witness. But we, doctors and mental health professionals, we sit very close from the most intimate stories of people. And our capacity to witness is bigger. And that makes our responsibility bigger. Because if we witness and deal with it in therapy room alone, this is ordinary practice. But if we witness and inform others about what we see, this is a critical human right approach to mental health. And this is an important responsibility that should be taught to mental health professionals. I work with the victims of torture. My work is not limited to treating their depression, but I also help them in writing a file according to the Istanbul Protocol in case they want to take it somewhere for redress. And beyond that all, I write for a journal on torture about what I observed. This is a critical human right approach to our practice.
Ci sono altre due domande? Grazie.
Io ne parlerò della vostra offerta di traduzione gentile. E volevo chiedere che cosa pensava di questo meccanismo molto perverso in cui i colonizzatori utilizzano le parole e la storia, la narrativa dei popoli che stanno opprimendo e facendola propria. Penso agli israeliani, sionisti che pensano adesso di essere loro vittime di un genocidio, oppure penso alle politiche di Trump dove sta accogliendo i sudafricani bianchi come rifugiati e nel frattempo sta togliendo i diritti agli immigrati negli Stati Uniti.
Volete che traduzco io?
Guarda, magari devo aggiungere l'ultima parte.
Sì, ce l'hai.
Well, the question was do you think about these perverse mechanisms by which colonizers utilize the narrative of the people that they are oppressing, and they make that narrative theirs. So, for example, Israeli people portray themselves as the victims of what's happening, of the genocide, and, for example, Trump inviting white South Africans to go to the US as refugees.
Okay. Sì.
Well, maybe you already answered on the beginning, but I am a medical student, and I wanted to ask you, as a medical student and as a future a future doctor, how can I acquire these tools and what I need to have a critical human rights approach to mental health? If it is absent in my curricula, how can I evaluate the suffering of people coming from situations of
disparità from what you showed us. You showed us the tools of oppression, of dominations, but I want to know more about the tools to help these people and how can I acquire this. I hope it's clear. Thank you.
Who's the next question?
Thank you for being here. I was thinking about the difficulties in raising awareness and empathy toward the Palestinian issues here in Europe. And I was noticing that nowadays seems like the main guilt of everything now is Netanyahu. And in Israel society, at the end of the day, actually there are many persons that are opposing him. So by the end of the day, it is in fact a democratic society, and we are not so guilty by supporting Israel as we have done for many decades. So, and it's very easy here on the news and the media to have the Israeli point of view, which proves that again, we are not so, we are not on the wrong side of history supporting Israel. So I would like to ask you, what is the point of view of the colonized? Because we know what is the Israel point of view, the colonizer, but what is the point of view of Palestinians about this issue? Thank you.
Well, what's my point of view about putting the blame on Netanyahu?
Yes, how do you feel about this narrative?
Okay.
Like Palestinians again don't have the right to say something about also this issue.
The Palestinians don't have the right to say?
To explain that it's just a fragment of history. They are not able to show the world what is the real situation. They don't have the same access to mainstream media, to communication, to language, to share narratives.
Okay. Well, again, we'll start with the last question. I think this is the Western media narrative now. Now that Western governments are a little bit embarrassed by the fact that people are dying due to famine, due to starvation, and that this has been going on for so long, and the protesters and solidarity movements start annoying the governments. So finally they want to create a narrative that protects the state of Israel and externalizes the problem, putting it on a stubborn president or prime minister, Netanyahu. So there is externalization and there is protection for the state of Israel. And I think those who understand the Palestinian perspective have the responsibility. Well, first we understand that it is about, it's so-called democracy, at least within the electoral process, Netanyahu is repeatedly voted for. And everyone is involved in the army and everyone is involved in colonial privileges. So we need to emphasize the responsibility of Israelis, average Israelis, in what's taking place. Unlike the Palestinian people or anyone under occupation, those who fight, they come forward without being elected. They fight in reaction. It is a process that is not organized, or it's not a democratic process. Now, yes, they might be popular and some people support them, but it's not a democratic process. That is represented by, that brings certain groups forward who fight in the name of the group, certain armed people forward that fight in the name of the nation. while the responsibility of the average Israeli in the behavior of the state of Israel should be highlighted. We cannot put it on the Prime Minister and absolve the state of Israel, but I think Western media has an interest in this portrayal because they want to protect the state, because they want to protect the interests of the state. Again, for the two other reasons that we mentioned earlier, the guilt of the Holocaust and the identification with the colonial past. So this image is maintained. For the medical student, I think I will give you a specific answer. First, you need to learn about colonialism and decolonial struggles. This is helpful for you as a human being, and it will open your eyes to many things that you will observe with the people that you work with, especially if you want to do global health in the future. And second, you need to pay attention to injustice in epistemology. Have a question about how do we know what we know? Injustice in epistemology, which leads to injustice in the practice. And I think the crisis of the pandemic has revealed many discrepancies and injustices in the practice of medicine and global health in different parts of the world. So epistemological justice is very important for anyone in the field of science, including medicine and global health. And the third thing that will be useful for anyone working with the migrant population, the refugee population, is to learn the Istanbul Protocol for the medical and psychological documentation of torture. So it's a collaborative work. Medical doctors do some part of it, and mental health professionals do another part of it. And usually we work in a team with lawyers. So that's something that can be done with lawyers. Before the coup in Egypt, I started teaching medical students in Al-Qasr Al-Aini, in Cairo University. Something about the Istanbul Protocol, the medical documentation of the Istanbul Protocol. It's a mixture of forensic medicine and mental health. It gives you an effective tool to report on the experiences of people who live torture, and you give them something for redress if they want to ask for redress, or if they want to go to the court in the future. It is something that can be useful. Now, last point about role reversal and projection. I think that this is connected with another. Who asked the question about role reversal? Yeah, it is connected to another phenomena that is necessary for any occupier. For any person who enjoys colonial privileges, they need to dehumanize the colonized. They don't see them as human beings. So they don't see themselves as violating human rights, because the colonized are not full humans. In Israeli literature, there are many descriptions for Palestinians, starting from Ben Gurion, saying that they are beasts on legs, until Gallant, who said that they are human animals, and in between, Palestinians were described as snakes, cockroaches, and many other names. So if you don't see them as humans, then you are not violating human rights. You can portray yourself as democratic country because the process within the colonizers is a democratic process. And you will have progressive journalism, and you will be progressive on gender rights and on women's rights. So if you look at it depends from which angle you are looking at human relations. So when you put the colonized aside because they are less than humans, then everything looks right and correct and clean. And I want to explain another psychological mechanism, which is projection. I want to remind you, let me take you 600 days ago and remind you of what the media reported on Palestinians. Israelis said that Palestinians decapitated babies. They said that they are raping, they are using rape as a systemic tool of terrorism. They spoke about putting children in an oven. They found a child in the oven. None of this ugly propaganda found any substantial evidence, first. Second, they decapitated babies. Israelis decapitated babies. Israelis raped inmates. They inserted mobile phones in the rectum of some prisoners and they were playing with him, making phone calls and vibrating the mobile. And those cases are documented by Israeli hospitals because the guy went to the hospital after, but there are several cases like that. The story of a boy in the oven, that happened in 48 in Deir Yassin massacre. When they wanted to scare Palestinians so that they will leave their villages without much confrontation, they went to Deir Yassin and they put the son, they went to the bakery and they would put the son of the baker in the oven. So what they are telling about Palestinians is just projection. They are projecting the evil that they are capable of doing onto Palestinians to further dehumanize the Palestinians and to create an image of Palestinians as barbaric and less than human so that they will feel comfortable and they will not have any cognitive dissonance about what they are doing.
Thank you, Dr. Jabr. I think we're out of time, but it was so important that I think we all remained, after the time we had set at the end. But I think it's time to close and to thank Dr. Samah Jabr
I thank you again
for everything you shared with us and how much we have been learning with you today. Really thank you from really our hearts.
Thank you very much.
To be here.
هلا اللقاء الثاني راح يكون بجوز